Hey, it's Tom here and welcome back to the channel. So just a couple of days ago I had a comment left on a YouTube video saying that Phil Town's latest quarterly filing was out in terms of his portfolio update, which I was very excited to see. So I immediately jumped across to the SEC's website, looked up World's Funds Trust, which is sort of the larger entity that Phil Town's Rule 1 fund seems to sort of fall under. Phil Town has had this Rule 1 fund since early 2020, and his filings are notoriously hard to find. So luckily, since I got that comment, I only had to kind of scroll through the last couple of days worth of filings in order to find the one that sort of represented the Rule 1 fund within that World Funds Trust. And from that, I was able to get some updated portfolio information for the Rule 1 fund. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing what Phil Town's current holdings are versus what they look like last quarter so that we can see some of the changes that have been made. And there is one particular holding which you can probably tell by the title of this video that when I saw that on the screen, when I was kind of scrolling through this SEC filing on my computer, my jaw damn near hit the floor, to be perfectly honest. And I'll get into some of the reasons why that is the case. But without further ado, let's get straight into the portfolio update for the Rule 1 fund. Now, in terms of the information being displayed here, I will leave a link down in the description below to the SEC filing itself. I've actually gone and put that into a spreadsheet. So Brad Counter, stock compounder, actually made a spreadsheet a couple of quarters ago, and he's sort of been tracking Phil Town's portfolio activity for a little while now. So Brad's currently on holiday, I think, but Brad, I've stolen your spreadsheet and I've updated it for you. So you're welcome to use this in one of your videos if you like as well. But that's where the data is coming from. With some of the filings for Phil Town, sometimes we tend to get more information than kind of other times of the year. I don't entirely know why that is. But this time around, we got all of his stock positions and other filings. We've also got option positions as well. There were some option positions in this particular portfolio, but as far as I can tell, it's just options that he's bought, whereas Phil Town typically does a lot of selling of options as well. So we don't entirely get the full picture of, I think, the options portfolio in this filing, but we certainly do get these stock holdings, which is very, very interesting. So let's just start from the top and work our way through. So Phil Town's largest position for some time has been Bank OZK, and that remains the case in this quarter. We saw no change in the shares. He still owns 416,269 shares in Bank OZK, worth a little under $17 million. So the net assets of Phil Town's Rule 1 fund come in at about $134 million. His stock holdings are about $88 million. So the balance of the fund is sort of in a mix, typically from just looking at previous filings, typically in a mix of just straight up cash and also money market funds. Now, we don't actually get the cash amount listed in this latest filing. We did get a money market fund, but I basically just assumed that if we take the entire net assets of the fund, which is listed, subtract out the current value of all the stocks, then we can get sort of a rough idea and estimate that the remaining balance is cash. So still about 34-35% of the fund in cash, which is a big allocation, and that's been the case for Phil Town for quite some time now at this point. But that's just a bit of sort of overall context when I say that this first position, Bank OZK, is about 12% of the fund. Next on the list, we have CF Industries. CF Industries is sort of the low-cost producer of a commodity, and that commodity is urea, which is sort of a nitrogen-based fertilizer. It's one that Phil Town has spoken a little bit about on his podcast a few times. Basically saying that yes, it's a commodity company and the commodity price can be somewhat volatile, but the actual cost of production is the lowest in industry for CF Industries. So he does believe that that is sort of a competitive advantage for the business, and we saw no change in shareholding for CF Industries. So it continues to own 295,000 shares. Current share price is $47.25, which means the full holding is worth just a little bit under $14 million, which represents about a 10% allocation in the Rule 1 fund. Now, I should also mention, as I'm sort of working through these different stock holdings, is that this was sort of the state of the fund as of the end of June. So since the end of June, share prices have probably moved around a little bit. The share price, I've assumed to figure out the value, is basically as of the share price yesterday, so the most recent prices, but shareholding as of the end of June. Hopefully that makes sense. So Phil Town may well have made some changes to these holdings in the last month. But this is going to be the best possible information we can get. It's only about a month or so old at this point. So after CF Industries, we have the Boeing company. Phil Town has had a shareholding in Boeing for quite some time now, actually right since the start of his fund. So he still continues to own 51,000 shares of Boeing. That represents about an $11.5 million position, which is an 8.6% allocation in the fund if you include the cash. And Phil Town has actually been very active in previous filings in terms of buying and selling options on Boeing as well. And we did see a couple of those options sort of show up in this filing. Like I say, we really don't get the full options picture, I don't think, in this particular filing, but continues to be a good holding for Phil Town, and one that he's written about in previous reports. And he's basically explained that he felt that the price of Boeing's stock in the market really represented the value roughly of about one of the key parts of Boeing's business, and he sort of felt like he was getting the rest of the business for free. So that continues to be a big holding with Boeing. Next up, we have Huntington Ingalls. So Huntington Ingalls, again, no change, about a $9 million position, or 6.7% of the portfolios. And I'll quickly work through some others that have also had no change since last time around, and then we can get into some of the juicy stuff in terms of the changes Phil Town has actually made in the portfolio. So in terms of other holdings with no change, we have Armada Hoffler, about a 4.2% position. Armada Hoffler is a real estate investment trust, a REIT in the US. We continue to have the Spider Gold ETF, which, as I've talked about in previous Phil Town portfolio updates, I think is sort of probably like an alternative to cash. So, the 87 or 88 million that he does have in stocks, I think, is probably overstating sort of how invested he really is. I think if stock prices got cheap enough, he would probably roll some of his gold holdings and also silver holdings, which we'll get to in a sec, probably into real businesses that produce cash flow. But that one is unchanged. We also have Sturm Ruger & Co. and Berkshire Hathaway, both unchanged, and both representing about 3.4% of the portfolio. Okay, so next up we have three stocks that Phil Town has sold, and in all three cases he has actually sold completely out of their stock. So he hasn't done any trimming, like selling half of it or a quarter of it or anything like that. In all three cases where he's sold a stock, he's exited completely. And the first one we have is Gildan Activewear. Gildan Activewear is again one of these businesses that Phil Town's had an association with for a long time, and a little bit like CF Industries, it's the low-cost producer in its industry, and the industry for Gildan Activewear, as the name might suggest, is essentially clothing. They are sort of the low-cost producer of things like t-shirts. They sell into some very, very large stores like Walmart in the US, for example. Phil Town sort of recounted this story a few times of being able to buy into Gildan Activewear when cotton prices shot through the roof, and it basically destroyed Gildan's profitability for about a year because there was a cotton crisis in Egypt. Yields were way down, cotton prices shot way up, which meant that the profitability of a t-shirt producer was basically destroyed because they had to buy in very, very expensive cotton. But it was a good example of sort of a short-term event that after a year was basically going to sort itself out. So Gildan Activewear, low-cost producer of clothing, and he has fully exited that position. Now, the next couple of positions that Phil Town has sold completely, first one is Ulta Beauty. Now, Ulta Beauty is a makeup business. Again, Phil Town has actually spoken about this one a little bit on his podcast. Ulta is a business that he has held right since March 2020, and it's been a home run for him. He was able to buy it in the depths of the sort of COVID pandemic crisis in the early days of that. It shot up to where he views it now trading in and around intrinsic value, maybe even slightly above intrinsic value, and he's basically sold out of it at that point. So he's been fairly open in speaking about that one. And finally, in terms of sales, we have Sanderson Farms. Now, Sanderson Farms, and you may be starting to see a common theme here, again, is sort of a low-cost producer type business, and Sanderson Farms is a poultry producer. So they produce chicken, meat, at a low cost. And interestingly, that position was not held for a very long time. So if we go back 2 quarters, we actually had some options turn up, some put options written for Sanderson Farms. And I think the price probably did drop to a point where Phil Town was forced to buy into Sanderson. And he's since unloaded that position. The reason why he's unloaded it, I don't quite know. Maybe he just decided he didn't like the business, or the price shot up to intrinsic value, or maybe he needed cash to buy into some of these other positions. I don't entirely know, but interesting to see that was quite a short-term holding for Phil Town. Okay, and now we get to some of the stuff that Phil Town has been buying. So there's a couple I think we can get out of the way fairly quickly. We have Barrick Gold, which again is a low-cost producer type business in the gold mining industry. I do sort of see Barrick Gold, again, a little bit like the straight-up gold position, although it's a business that will produce cash flow. Its cash flows are very dependent on the price of the gold commodity, right? So I do sort of see that again as a little bit of one of these cash alternatives or macroeconomic kind of hedges that Phil Town might have on. He has held Barrick Gold last quarter, so he owned 50,000 shares last quarter. He's bumped that up to 150,000 shares, so he's tripled that position, and it makes up about 2.4% of the fund. So that's the first one. The other one in a similar kind of category is actually an iShares Silver Trust, so this is sort of like a silver ETF, I suppose. That's a brand new position, 50,000 shares, represents not quite 1% of the portfolio, and that's actually one that in the last update, I believe he'd also written put options on. So similar to what potentially happened with Sanderson Farms a couple of quarters ago, he may have been forced to buy into that iShares Silver Trust, but again, I kind of see that as a bit of a cash alternative for Phil Town. Okay, and now we get into the rather juicy stuff. We have two more brand new positions to round out the portfolio for Phil Town. The first one is actually in Sprouts Farmers Market, and this is again one of those ones that's not entirely surprising to see in the portfolio because again he had written put options on Sprouts Farmers Market, and that showed up in the last quarterly update. He had put options written at $28 per share. If I look at Sprouts today and over the past few months, it's traded below 28 quite a bit. So I imagine he probably was again forced to buy into Sprouts, kind of like he was with Sanderson Farms maybe a quarter ago. But again, he's collecting premium on these put options, and it's a nice way for him to basically lower his cost basis on stocks that he would be willing to buy at a certain price anyway. So Sprouts Farmers Market is not a business that exists here in New Zealand, so I'm not going to be able to give you a whole lot of insight about it, but if you know anything about Sprouts or have kind of investigated it from an investing perspective, I'd love to hear that down in the comments below. Now the final position, and without doubt the biggest by far and away highlight of this particular portfolio update for Phil Town, is his last brand new holding, which is in Alibaba. Now Alibaba has been an extremely hot topic in the value investing space over the past few months, and really across the investing space in general, particularly after some interesting news that came out of China in terms of potential crackdowns on US investment in Chinese businesses. It's been a very, very hot topic for me, basically, since a couple of the investors that I really respect a lot have bought into Alibaba as well. So it all sort of started with Charlie Munger back here buying it in the Daily Journal Corporation. Alibaba was the first stock that the Daily Journal Corporation had bought. Daily Journal's portfolio is managed by Charlie Munger. It's really the first stock they bought since 2008, and we saw that they made a position in that in their first quarter 13F update, and that kind of started this whole flow-on effect of a bunch of other investors getting really interested in it. So following on from Charlie Munger, we also saw Mohnish Pabrai purchase into it. Mohnish Pabrai has then gone on to talk fairly openly about his thoughts on both Alibaba and also Tencent, another Chinese business, but sort of through the Naspers/Prosus lens, which is basically a South African holding company, Naspers, that has a shareholding in Tencent. And you can, not a stock tip here, but if you dig into that particular entity, and there's lots of YouTube videos on that as well, potentially you could possibly buy into Tencent at a discount to its market price in the US. So there's been a lot of interest in Chinese stocks, and the reason that it really surprises me that Phil Town has bought into this one is because just 2 weeks ago, literally, we saw a video come up on Phil Town's YouTube channel talking all about the risks of investing into Chinese stocks. And at the time when I watched that a couple of weeks back, I really interpreted that as Phil Town basically saying that, you know, Chinese stocks are too risky, they don't let auditors come in and see if the accounting is correct and so on, and therefore it's really quite a risky business. That was sort of the interpretation that I got, that, you know, he'd sent one of his analysts to China and he really wasn't interested in investing in those businesses. But just this morning I kind of went back and watched that video again to see if maybe I interpreted that as him being overly negative, maybe I kind of got the wrong end of the stick. And after rewatching that video, he does actually specifically name two Chinese businesses, Alibaba and JD.com, which he says are both pretty well known for having more accurate accounting than other Chinese businesses. But he did say that if you really want to get invested in one of these businesses, in his view, you really have to go to China and kick the tires, as he sort of described it. So it's a massive understatement to say that this one surprised me when I did see it turn up in Phil Town's latest update. He now owns about 30,000 shares of Baba, so the US listed version of Alibaba, and it's about a 4.5% position in the overall portfolio. So there you have it. Phil Town is the latest addition to the long list now of value investors that have purchased into Alibaba. It's one that I'm actually going to be recording a podcast on with Jason Rothman from the After Dinner Investor just this afternoon as I'm recording this video. We're going to be doing a full breakdown of Alibaba on his podcast, so that should be good fun as well. Like I say, it's certainly been a very, very hot topic in the investing community in general, and especially in the value investing community, which I, of course, am a part of. So that is Phil Town's portfolio, and that is some of my sort of thoughts on the actual names in the portfolio, some of my initial impressions. So I do hope you enjoyed the video. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on some of the holdings and moves that Phil Town's made down in the comments below. So if you're interested in sharing, definitely drop that down below and I'll be sure to get back to you. But that's it from me for this one, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.